Hi, I'm Larry Hughes, meat cutter for over 50 years, and this video is for Fair, Idaho, and we're going to break down this lamb into pieces that will be for the kitchen table at home. Basically, the half lamb has 13 ribs, pelvic bone, vertebrae. You have 2 shanks on it. What we're going to do is we're going to separate the hind leg off first and cut it into a sirloin half and a round half of roast, and then we'll separate the front of the 13 ribs. We'll come up about 4.5 ribs and separate the chuck off of the short loin, which is your lamb chops, and then your lamb rack. First thing we're going to do is separate the flank a little bit off it, and then we're going to separate the hind leg off it. That will be your hind leg. Then we're going to separate the chuck off it, which will be your shoulder chops and your blade chops. Now you basically have 3 pieces. Your lamb shoulder, which this side will be your blade chops. This side over here will be your O-bone chops. This is your shank and your brisket. And your leg we'll cut in half and make 2 roasts out of that. That's your sirloin half of the lamb leg, and this is your round half of the lamb leg. We'll also cut some of this shank off here. And that's your round half of the lamb leg. Now we're going to cut on the shoulder. We're going to cut the shank off, and what in beef would be the brisket part off, which in this case will be for lamb stew. That is your lamb shank, which generally gets used for like soups and stews. Same with this. In beef, this would be a lamb or a beef brisket, which you'd put on your barbecue and cook for several hours. But in lamb, it's so small, basically what it gets used for is lamb stew. And this would generally be your O-bone chops if you'd cut it this way, if we had a bandsaw here. And then this over here would be your blade chops, which we would cut this way, and then we'd save the 2 back ends again for lamb stew. So, but what we're going to hear in this case, we're going to cut the blade off of the shoulder and have a shoulder roast and a blade roast. This will be your lamb shoulder roast, and this your lamb blade roast. But like I said, if we had a bandsaw, we could cut this further down and make blade chops out of that. Now this piece here, this end down here is the loin where you get your loin chops. And this piece up here is the rack where you get your lamb rack. Yeah, this lamb breast I'm cutting off right now is actually right at the end of the lamb ribs where the cartilage starts. And this back here on beef would be your flank or flank steak. But by cutting this off, there again, we can put a pocket in this and make a stuffed lamb breast out of that if we want, or we can use it for lamb stew. Now this part right here, I'm going to cut the lamb loin off from the lamb rack, and we'll cut lamb chops out of this. But this, we're going to make what we call a French lamb rack. We're going to cut these ribs off right there. And this also, if you were to cut it into chops, with these would be like a lollipop chop. And this could be a treat cutting down through these ribs. Now to make a French lamb rack, we have to basically pull all the meat off the back of the rib bones. And pull this little bit of a blade bone out of there. Now the Frenchmen make lollipops. You just cut down between the ribs and leave the bones exposed. And these are typically 7 to 8 ribs, depending on how you break your lamb. And for the kitchen table, they recommend 4 ribs per person. So if you were going to have a family of 4 guests, you'd want to have 2 of these. And that is basically a French lamb rack. And that is breaking down the whole critter, except the chops right here. Now on the chops, we're going to pull some of this fat out of here, which is basically called kidney suet. That's where your kidney is at. Then we cut the chops like so. And this is out of the loin. This on a beef would be T-bones, and this would be a porterhouse. When you get the fillet in it, that's where the porterhouse comes in. But on a lamb, they're just all lamb chops, lamb sirloin chops. The lamb loin is more of your desirable, what people like to buy on chops. They really don't care much for the blade chops and the O-bone chops. These are your better, but people will eat those. And those are basically your lamb chops. And that's pretty much so the whole lamb. There again, you got a whole lamb leg, depending on the size of your family, you might want to leave it whole. Typically they're 8 to 10 pounds. This was probably a little bigger, so I cut it in half. Both of these will feed a family of 5 or 6 easy. And that's the sirloin part, which has got a little bit of tenderloin and a little bit of top sirloin in it. Then you've got your O-bone roast right there, or shoulder chops. And then you have your blade roast or blade chops, your lamb rack, and your shank and your stew meat, and then your lamb riblets. And a lamb breast over here. If you want to stuff that, you can cut a pocket in it and stuff it with whatever you want to make it. Have a stuffed lamb breast. And that's the whole lamb.